Not consistent.
Remember they after my surgery, I have other conditions that like my body reacts differently than anesthesia. So they couldn't wake me up. So I think that was God showing me that like I have to put my trust in. Because I eventually woke up like 2 days later after I was supposed to. Oh man. Yeah. So I think that was God showing me like
it's really
can't do without me. Like He is my strength. I'm not to rely on my trust and faith in humans.
You have those
I'm so tired. I have no complications. I just got scars from the shins.
That's awesome. And
So
yeah, kudos to you for pushing yourself, for like being here and still coming in on your own initiative and stuff like that.
yeah, it's awesome. I don't know. I have dreams. I have dreams of surgery for like the end of the world and stuff about my family. I have dreams about my mom. That like it just seems so real. And I just started getting them after I was baptized. Like extremely real ones. So I don't think that that's gonna stop. Time to living in. I'm getting baptized. I'm with God in Christ. With my sister and my older sister. My younger sister.
Oh no, my view's like super unbalanced.
Yeah, but I don't think
Over here.
I think God as she was.
Do that.
Never in a million years thought I would do
I decided that couch is going to keep sliding us out of it this morning.
Yeah, that couch.
I was
It's
talking
not
about that
awful, but
yesterday.
it doesn't have to be.
But it's not great either.
I was like, dude, I never thought I'd talk
I feel like I would like it more if I had like a little pillow to kind of like sit right in the back and then kind of like,
You're turning into one of those little old ladies that needs like
not for
I
my
would
butt,
say
but
both
for my
for
back.
back support pillows, butt support pillows, little stool for
Yes,
legs.
the stool is necessary no matter.
Big challenges and struggles you go through your life. I think
Ugh.
that will touch people.
Are you ready, folks?
Knowing someone who's been through so much.
Let's do this thing. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are at our final lesson in this series, Cut Them Some Slack. And this is the one where I get to talk a little bit, and you guys get to talk a lot of it. Just so you guys know, so you're aware, we are streaming this live, but we're streaming it only to our 416 channels. So it's not like out in the public ether for people to watch. So, it'll only be seen by our group. So if that makes a difference to you in terms of how willing you are to talk, well, there it is. We've looked at some stories in the Bible in the last couple of weeks that we may have looked down upon in the past, or we've known people that have looked down upon these things or misjudged the motivations and the reasonings for those events in the past. And we've sort of reframed how we see those stories based on how we have faced life during this pandemic time where we were away, where we were not together. And how Christ responds to our human reactions through those situations. Because, surprise, when things are in a state of crisis, humans behave as if things are in a state of crisis. And that's okay. That's okay. So hopefully, what you have taken away from these stories that we've done so far is that we need to extend grace to ourselves and to others, just as Christ has extended grace to us. And to accept comfort in the many forms that it can arrive, and approach difficult situations with an attitude of humility. And so today's lesson in this series is called The Throne of Grace. And I want, before we even get into this conversation, I want us to take a look at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Because I think this is going to be our anchoring verse for today's lesson. I got a couple other verses that we're going to be talking about as well, but this is kind of going to be the anchoring point for us this morning. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. It's the very last verse of the chapter. And it says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Help us in our time of need. And I think it's really important for us to take a look at what that verse says and to really internalize what it means. Because what is it talking about? Well, first, it's talking about how we approach God, right? How we interact with him, how we can consider his blessings and his love upon us, right? That's how we approach his throne of grace. But then on top of that, it gives us instructions, right? It gives us instructions. It tells us to approach that throne with confidence, with the surety that the God who is on that throne is going to love us and is going to extend that grace to us, for us to be certain of it, so that we may receive mercy. And then another instruction, to find grace to help us in our time of need. So when we approach the throne of God, that throne of grace, we approach it with confidence, we approach it with surety, so that we can find the grace that we need when we're in the middle of a crisis. And remember, the word crisis doesn't necessarily mean something horrible is happening. Crisis is literally a state of change. That's what its root word is from. I think it's Greek. But it means a state of change. So anytime you're undergoing change, negative or positive, you're in a time of crisis. You're in a time of crisis. And so with this perspective, looking at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, we can begin to develop an understanding of what grace means as we are coming out and in many ways entering a new period of crisis. So we're focusing on these points so that we can confide to one another about what has gone unseen for us this last year. Like last week, we talked about things unseen. We talked about Nicodemus specifically, because we see him in the Bible at 3 points in his life. And this is a correction from last week. We missed one little bit where a couple of years after he approaches Jesus in the cover of darkness, he does side with him at the Sanhedrin as things are starting to pile up and the accusations are starting to really, really fly. But anyway, we see Nicodemus at 3 points. One where he is unsure, but willing to understand, willing to try to understand. And then later on, 2 years later, we see him take Jesus aside at the Sanhedrin against the other Pharisees. And then later on, beyond that, we see him help bury the body of Jesus, a fully fledged believer at that point. But all of that time in between, those 2 years in between, we don't know what happened to him. We don't know what his journey meant, how he went from an unbelieving, confused person to fully believing, defending Jesus in front of the high priests and the other Pharisees, and then eventually being one of the men that helps bury his body. We don't know what happens in between. Those are the things unseen. And so when we reframed that lesson, when we reframed that understanding of Nicodemus, we did so knowing that there are many times in our lives and in the lives of other people that we are around, that there are many things that are unseen. And for us to make assumptions about those things is wrong. So, we know that everyone has taken something away from their time away in the pandemic, out in that ether of either being home or being at work under really strange circumstances. So everybody took something away from that. There are lessons learned. And we need to try to open up about some of those experiences, some of those lessons, or the struggles that we faced, so that then we can move forward together. That's been the whole point of this mini-series as we have come back to in-person class. We need to get ourselves all on the same level, on the same page, so that when we move forward to the next thing, we can do so together, understanding what everybody has gone through and knowing that everybody went through it differently. So I'm going to say it is hard to share. Sometimes it feels cheesy, sometimes it feels awkward, and we may wonder what good comes out of it. Well, let me clarify some things. Confiding, confessing, testifying. Those are all words that are common to us Christians, right? Those are all things that we are expected to do. And the act of voluntarily putting our struggles, our thoughts, and our doubts on display is a part of Christianity that we in our current structure look down upon. We don't do that, really. We don't do that in class. We barely do it with each other privately. And we certainly don't do it in the big church. We actively misjudge its purpose. We often use confession as a form of self-punishment. I've done wrong, so I'm going to atone for it by letting everybody know and just bracing myself for the impact, for the weird stares, for the private words, or like, oh, that's a really bad struggle. It's a form of self-punishment. But in reality, it is one of the tools that Christ has given us to bring us blessing and to build us up together. That's the entire point of our group 416, right? Ephesians 4:16. We all have a part and we build ourselves up together. It's supposed to result in joy. It's supposed to result in relief. And it's supposed to result in community. So today, we are asking that you not only reevaluate what it means to confide in your brothers and sisters, those of us who are here, and those of us who are online, but put into practice. And unsurprisingly, humility and grace are intertwined with receiving comfort. We need all three of these. We need all three of these to move forward together. We need humility on our part, we need grace from God and each other, and we need comfort from each other and God to move forward. So I already talked about grace in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16, but we want to talk about humility here briefly. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And that's something we've been basically preaching out over this entire series. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. As we reevaluated some of those other stories that we looked at in the last two lessons, that was the driving focus here. Let's be patient with these people. Their behaviors and their reactions are normal, and they're a result of perfectly human emotions to perfectly human moments. And we need to bear with one another, and we need to be patient with them. James chapter 4, verse 6. But he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. And later on, James chapter 4, verse 10. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. We sing that song. You know that song. Have you taken a moment to actually think of the words? It's directly from James chapter 4. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. We need to put ourselves down in such a way that we can express our weaknesses, express our failings, so that in doing so, we get built up together. Humility. We talked about grace. And humility and grace come together, we receive comfort. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. I like to think of comfort that comes from God as water, or as a liquid of some sort. And we're a glass. And we're a glass stacked on top of other glasses. Like you see in those fancy parties in the movies, where they have the champagne tower of glasses. The liquid and water of comfort gets poured out, and it fills our glass. And this is how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to fill our glass so much that it overflows. That it overflows, and it starts filling the glasses below us. It starts filling the glasses that are around us. That is how comfort is supposed to work. Comfort from God. We can't take comfort for ourselves. It's actually impossible to do so. It's impossible to take comfort for ourselves because there is just so much comfort that comes from God. It's overflowing. You cannot contain it. And so what do you do with it? Well, you spread it. You give it to other people. You fill their glasses, and in turn, they start filling other glasses. That's how it's supposed to work. It starts to fail when we're not around other people, when we don't have community. Because otherwise it's just an overflowing glass that goes nowhere. But here we are, right? Here we are, in person, virtually. We have a community. And so when the water of comfort gets poured out into our glasses, well, there's a bunch of other glasses that can be filled as well. Because they're all here. They're all here. Humility and grace result in comfort. And we need all three to move forward. So, I'm going to start turning it over to you guys. I want to hear from you. What kind of lessons, what kind of takeaways did you take from the time away? The time in the pandemic, where many of us were just at home. Many of us changed our work so that we could work from home. Others had to continue going into work, but under new restrictions. And of course, we weren't together. We weren't together. We had a whole year of activities planned, guys, for 2020. I looked the other day at my notebook. I knew exactly who was going to be teaching what Sunday, what Wednesday for all of 2020. We had everything planned out, but it didn't happen. So I'm going to start. Here's my first takeaway. My first takeaway is this. Whatever plans I made, whatever plans I thought were going to be possible, it's not up to me. That was my first takeaway of the year. It may not be possible. It's not up to me. You can make plans all day, left and right, but at any moment, those plans can be completely scuttled, completely changed. And the lesson is not really that plans change, because we already knew that. The lesson is, for me, what are you going to do about it when the plans change? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit there and stewing about your perfectly laid, perfectly crafted plan, upset that it didn't go the way you wanted it to, or that it didn't go at all? Or are you going to pivot and change and adapt to the circumstances as they arrive? Because we had to do that, right? We had to do that. Like I said, I had the entire schedule of who was going to teach here in this classroom every Sunday and every Wednesday for all of 2020. Like, I was going to teach some, Paul was going to teach some, Tori was going to teach some, Hayden was going to teach some. But then we couldn't do that anymore. We were going to do this really great men's and women's class on Wednesday nights. We were so excited for it. We got to do one lesson, and then we stopped coming. We couldn't come back. And so all of those plans, all of those things, all of that work that we put together, that was just set aside. And we had to pivot over to something new. My takeaway then is, when your plans are scuttled, when everything that you built and you worked toward is no longer relevant, no longer the thing that you need to do, you need to be ready. You need to be ready to change course. All right. Speak up. What's your takeaways?
I don't like pandemics.
What?
I said I don't like pandemics.
No, nobody likes pandemics. Fair. You don't like pandemics? I don't like them either.
I think for my family, it was a lot of trust. We lost my grandpa during it, and that was really hard, especially for the fact that, like, at the time that we figured out that he had been sick, that my mom was also sick, and so nobody was allowed to, like, really console each other. We all had to go into isolation at separate places. So that was tricky.
Yeah.
But my mom was telling me just the other day that one of the things that stuck with her the most was, like, the lots of the sorries and, sorry, I'm trying not to cry.
Sorry.
All the things that they all said. And she said that one that stuck the most was that Terry Singleton had said that if he had to choose a way to go, either get quickly or by cancer, he would want to go quickly. And my mom's like, you're right. Like, Grandpa would have just, like, suffered and dragged on, and it would have been really uncomfortable. And this way, it wasn't as uncomfortable. But it took a lot of time to figure that out. And so, like, initially I was really mad, and I was like, God, what are you doing? Like, this plan, like, whatever you have planned, obviously went haywire, because this is not good. Nobody's enjoying this. This is awful. But being able to look back at it later, is like, okay, like, his timing was good. Like, things worked out. Maybe it's not how I would have planned it, but I'm the little kid, and if I have my way, I'd always eat dessert before dinner. And that's not healthy for you, even though it's immediate gratification. So it was a lesson that was needed, but was really hard to have. And so it's kind of like what I just keep going back to now. Whenever something goes crazy or your plans don't go the way you want, I'm just like, okay, I can't see the big picture. I'm just the kid that wants the cookie. And God knows the whole plan and what's actually going to be good. And I need to just trust that, and instead of becoming angry that he's not doing things my way. So that was a fun lesson.
That's usually a pretty hard lesson to learn. Coming to terms with the lack of control of your life and the situation. And thank you for sharing. What else? What are your takeaways, guys? What are your takeaways?
My year was definitely a lot of things. What is it? So I guess, as far as struggles with the pandemic go and stuff like that, one of the big things was because of the different comfort levels of me and my roommate, who I'm still very good friends with. We had to like move out after living together for like 6 years and stuff like that, and then like the big car accident that happened a little bit ago, like just kind of supplemented me suddenly losing a huge amount of my independence. And then, but like, of course, there's been a lot of good stuff too. I'm now with the love of my life, soon to be married. But even that was like, the dating was weird in the beginning. It went from like, we could only talk on Zoom to, for a while, I couldn't go in a home, so we like ate in cars, watched DVDs in cars, and like the first time we went to a restaurant was just a couple weeks ago. After like a year and we're already engaged and stuff like that. But like, I think a big takeaway from all that is like there were a huge amount of challenges, but there was also a lot of joy in just remembering that like we can't escape hard times. They're gonna come for all of us. Like, also looking at 416, my other friend group, like needing to change the way we do things, like not being able to meet as much, and we're here again, like hopeful, but picking up some pieces and stuff like that, and like through the hard times, like I think it's important to remember that we can find moments of joy and we can still push forward. We can always get up again, kind of thing, and God has blessed us with that strength.
Yeah, I agree. I think having to understand that like we go through hard times, we go through crises, we go through things that we don't want to deal with is a huge takeaway, and that's an excellent one. Thank you, Paul. Who else?
Mine's more internal, I guess. Like, I didn't have any huge struggles during the pandemic where I lost people, or even my lifestyle changed all that much. But like the way I was able to worship, the way I was able to serve in church, all completely changed. And I had like a mini crisis because I was so used to doing so many things, and I had to really think about like why I was relieved but also upset that I wasn't doing so much anymore. And I think what I realized is it really came down to pride. I was really proud of all the things I was able to do in church. Or I was proud of being able to contribute and be part of things. And during pandemic, everything was online, everything was rather isolated, and I think it was a really good lesson in meekness, which is a concept I've always struggled with because I do not like the definition that we have of meekness. So I had to really look at kind of what the Bible was talking about when it says that you should be meek. And what I've taken away is it's a lack of pride and it's a self-discipline of calmness. So for me to be able to say like, yes, I could be still doing all these things. I still could be getting like all this encouragement. I didn't want people to think that my faith was failing because all of a sudden there was a pandemic. But for me to step back and set that aside and be like, no, it's not about if people think you're doing a good job or not. It's not about it like you just trying to push through and do everything. It's about you still serving in the capacities you can and having the discipline to be okay with that. And to still find grace in that for yourself and to be calm in those situations. And that may seem, I don't know how that sounds coming out, but it was really, really hard for me to do. Because I never really considered myself to be an overly prideful person. So to realize that that's a flaw that I was dealing with all of a sudden took me off guard. And it took maybe, I think until we started coming back, it took me that long to kind of figure myself out. So that's where I'm at.
Pride is one of those sneaky ones. Like, you don't realize you have it until something happens that points it out to you, or somebody points it out to you. But to be able to recognize and to grow and adapt is really important. Thank you. I have time for maybe one more if anybody wants to share. One more takeaway.
So during the pandemic, I found myself with a lot more time and capital than I had anticipated because I didn't have to spend too much money on stuff. And in doing so, I started working on my hobbies, really going full on my hobbies. Mainly, we started a podcast, and through that, I got to keep connections with people that I care about, and it gave me a lot more agency over what I was doing with what I wanted to do. And I don't think that's something that would have happened if I didn't have the time and resources that I had during the pandemic, which is a little bit counter to what some of the other stories said. Really, the pandemic was a bit of a boon for me, where it gave me a little bit more clarity on what it was that I wanted to do. And I'm starting to get recognition for that. And I mean, that's really it. Like it gave me time to focus on what it was that I wanted to do and reevaluate some things that maybe I didn't need to spend as much time doing some other stuff. And I could just focus on the things that, make me happy and potentially lead to a new, career avenue. But we'll see.
Thank you. Yeah, so it is important to note that for as much suffering as there was out there in the pandemic, there was also a lot of gain for certain people. Having extra time, extra resources, and extra money will do that. And that's not wrong. That's not bad. That's not bad. It is, it is kind of how the inequality of life goes. For every person undergoing something very difficult, traumatic, and horrible, there's somebody else having like the best time of their lives, and vice versa. So that's why it's important to confess these things. That's why it's important to talk about it, because everybody is coming at this from a different perspective, and everybody went through it in a different way. And as we move forward, we need to understand that. We need to make our peace with it, because no matter what you went through, there was something you didn't like about it, and there was something you did like. And we need to make our peace with that and move on. So, that's it. That's all I got for you this morning. Thank you for sharing, everybody. it's important for us to continue this habit of sharing, so that we can continue to share in humility and to give each other grace and receive that comfort that comes from God and from each other. Next week, we're going to be doing something different. And then beyond that, we're going to have some other teachers throughout the rest of the summer. We're working on who's going to do that and when, so stay tuned. We will continue to be streaming our Sunday morning class online on YouTube and through the Facebook page. So you can continue to tune in or catch it later if you'd like. But that's all I've got for you this morning. Thank you so much, you guys, and we'll see you next time.